Next, from the state capitol, a group calling itself Change Illinois announces their plan to put a constitutional amendment on the 2014 ballot that would take the task of redrawing legislative political boundaries away from the political parties. This runs about 30 minutes.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Ryan Blitzstein. I'm the president of Change Illinois. And I want to start with the issue that's on the table here that we're talking about. The people of Illinois are not satisfied with our government. 77% of Illinois voters say corruption's widespread, and the facts really back them up. We're number 3 in terms of public corruption, and just 15% of us believe that state government is doing the right thing most of the time. And yet, if you look at what's happening electorally, last year House incumbents had a 97% success rate in the general election. In 2/3 of the races, there wasn't even a challenger. And so something's going on here when the people are unhappy, and yet the same legislators are winning again and again and again. There are a lot of root causes for this, but we think that the biggest one is the broken redistricting process here in the state of Illinois. Every 10 years, as many of you know, the district boundaries are drawn and redrawn by the General Assembly behind closed doors. There's very little public input in this process, and whether it's Democrats or Republicans in the leadership of the General Assembly, it ends up with quite partisan lines. Essentially, the legislators are drawing the lines to guarantee their own reelection. Effectively, the legislators are choosing their own voters. It happens this way, again, under Democratic leadership and Republican leadership. And so today what we're doing is we're taking the first step toward changing that as part of Change Illinois. We're releasing a draft constitutional amendment that would create an independent redistricting commission to draw the maps. This is a nonpartisan initiative that has diverse, bipartisan, statewide support. We know from the Paul Simon Institute poll just a few months ago that 70% of Illinois voters support this reform, with 38% of them strongly favoring what we're talking about doing. And majority support holds for Democrats and Republicans, for independents. It holds in Chicago and Cook County and the suburbs, and it holds downstate. It also holds for men and for women. Voters want change, and we're getting ready to give it to them. So I've got some coalition partners and some board members up here to help me talk about it. But before I do that, let me give you a little bit of a preview of what this initiative looks like. We're committed to a transparent initiative that's the opposite of the current redistricting process. We're going to be spending the next month in sort of exploratory mode. I and my colleagues are going to be traveling around the state, soliciting feedback from as many people and as many groups as will provide us with feedback. And the idea here is really to find out, what do the people want? What do the citizens want throughout the state in a redistricting process? We know that it's something different from what exists now, and we want to hear back from them their feedback as to what they think of our draft amendment. In early June, we're going to finalize the language and the petitions, and then we're going to go out with thousands of grassroots volunteers throughout the state over the next 11 months through next spring and collect something like 300,000 valid signatures on a statewide basis. November 4th of next year, again, November 4th, 2014, will be the date in which all of the voters in the state of Illinois can vote to make major change at the state level. And so before we take questions, I want to invite a few leaders of our board and coalition to share their perspective, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So first, I'd like to invite Deborah Harrington, who's the former president of the Woods Fund and one of our vice chairs of our board, to come up and say a few words.
Thank you, Ryan. Can you hear me? It's awfully noisy in here. Okay. Thank you. Throughout my career, it's better. Throughout my career in government service and in the philanthropic and foundation work, I've seen the good that comes from sound public policy. I have also witnessed serious problems when public policies emerge that come from politics. I am deeply concerned about how government corruption has harmed our democracy. And I heard far too many people say things like, my vote doesn't matter, or there is no choice, or my representatives don't listen to me. These are among the many reasons why I became involved in the formation of Change Illinois 4 years ago. Our unified advocacy and powerful voices helped enact the state's first limits on campaign contributions. Now we will use our same people power to give Illinoisans a chance to see that their votes do matter. We will fix the broken redistricting system and process with a grassroots campaign to put an amendment on the ballot November 2014. Our proposed constitutional amendment will create a redistricting process that will give power back to the people and make politicians more accountable to voters. For several months, we have been drafting an amendment with the help of leaders from diverse and broad-based organizations as well as experts in the field. And our proposed system is independent, nonpartisan, and transparent. How will we accomplish this? There are 4 points I'd like to share with you. First, the Independent Commission will reflect Illinois' diversity, and the redistricting will benefit all communities, including communities of color. Volunteers, not career politicians, will draw the legislative district boundaries. Second, our draft amendment includes criteria that the Commission will have to follow. Not only must districts be equal in population and contiguous, the Commission will be forbidden from using maneuvers to dilute the voting strength of minority communities. Third, the amendment instructs the Commission to respect, to the extent possible, the geographic integrity of cities, counties, local neighborhoods, and local communities of interest. The fourth and final point is very important, and it would be another first for the state of Illinois. The amendment will prohibit the Commission from drawing districts with the intention of helping or hurting election chances of any party or candidate. With this victory, we will send a potent message to Springfield that we, the people of Illinois, demand reform, and that people united will never be defeated. Thank you. I'm going to bring up now Peter Bensinger, who is also a vice chair of Change Illinois.
Thank you, Deborah. Right now in Illinois, the politicians pick the voters. The voters don't pick the legislators. Let me repeat that. If you think that the voters pick the legislative officials, you're sadly mistaken. It's just the reverse. The legislative officials that draw the maps pick the voters. As a consequence, the legislators owe their allegiance to the leaders that draw the maps, not to the voters in their districts. This constitutional amendment will change that process. And that process needs to change. I'm going to tell you what Newt Minow, who's a member of Change Illinois and a very well-respected public servant, chaired the Federal Communications Commission under John F. Kennedy. And he said this: the best way to clean up Illinois government is to put the voters in charge. And here's the way to do it. Because right now the voters in whatever precinct, in whatever legislative district, in whatever senatorial district they're in, the person that is their elected representative is there by the choice of a legislative leader. By moving a precinct, by moving a couple of boundary lines, the state ends up having people in office. And those people in office are there by dint of the maps, not the will of the voters. With this constitutional amendment, the voters will have a chance again to really be heard by the people representing them in their individual districts. I think there'll be less partisanship. I believe there'll be much more cooperation. And I believe there will be an opportunity for Illinois government to be more representative of the people of this great state.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to call up our last speaker, Ray Lopez Calderon, who is the Executive Director of Common Cause Illinois.
Hi, that's Ray Lopez Calderon, Common Cause, Illinois. I was trying to wake you up. I hope I did. So, first of all, Common Cause Illinois is an organization that goes back to 1970, founded by John W. Gardner. We represent over 3,000 dues-paying members in Illinois and over 400,000 citizens across the United States. I wanted to say something about redistricting because Common Cause has been a leader in the fight of redistricting for several years, and as a member of Change Illinois, we want to show our strong support of the effort mentioned here by Mr. Blitzstein. I should say that redistricting is going to be a very big fight here in Illinois. Some people believe that this is a tradition that shouldn't be upset. I want to focus in on that word tradition, the word tradition. There is nothing in the Constitution that says anything about districts and redistricting. It talks about populations, it talks about states being able to set their elections, but there's nothing that specifically says we have to have districts chosen the way that we have them, or that we even have to have districts at all. In fact, until 92 years ago, we didn't even have a statute that mentioned specifically districts. So let's talk about upsetting a tradition that really is a tradition that does not go back to the founding of the United States. What we have and what we see every day, not just in Illinois, but particularly most egregious in Illinois, is gerrymandering. Everybody knows what gerrymandering is. It comes from the name of Elbridge Gerry, who was a legislator in Massachusetts and who created a salamander-looking like district. Nowadays, we'd be happy to see a salamander-like district. We have other things that look like microscopic cellular structures and who knows what. The districts are unintelligible. But these districts are made strangely on purpose. They're made so that parties that control the mapping process can create ideological cells so that some districts become so partisan that they're easily winnable either by their party or the opponent party can only run in a district where they have to be pander to the most conservative ideology or the most leftist ideology. So gerrymandering not only creates a problem of power where legislators are choosing their voters, as was mentioned earlier, but it also creates a problem across America where we have ideological polarization because the districts are packing people by ideology. Something that should be noted today about this effort is that many organizations, reform organizations, grassroots organizations have talked about redistricting reform for many years. But make no mistake, today's announcement is something different. This is not just a policy announcement. It's not a complaint to the press. We are announcing a grassroots effort led by organizations like ours that represent thousands of constituents across Illinois. We intend to work with Change Illinois to knock on every door and to stand on every corner and get people to support this effort. We care about this because Illinois has to change. We're in a state where we have the dubious distinctions of having the last 4 governors out of 7 be felons and in prison, and to be tied with Texas for the most vicious partisan map in the country. We have to do something now. And that something is what's being announced today with Change Illinois. This is a new effort. This is something you haven't seen, and just be on the lookout and be prepared for the years to come. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ray. I appreciate your support. We're now going to take some questions, and we have both the 4 of us who spoke and some of our other coalition partners here to answer them. So, okay, all right, Mark.
Yes. With the rules of the Illinois Constitution, they give people who want to do citizen ballot initiatives a very narrow window of the 4th article in which they can make modifications. Have you guys worked with attorneys to see whether this draft fits within those guidelines and will stand up to court scrutiny?
We have. Part of the reason that we're doing this exploratory phase of the campaign is to hear what coalition partners think, what new coalition members, what stakeholders throughout the state think, what the public thinks, and also what the best attorneys and best legal scholars think. We already have had conversations with folks at organizations like MALDEF, the Brennan Center. One of our key advisors, Nicholas Stephanopoulos at the University of Chicago, is one of the noted authorities on redistricting on a nationwide basis. We've had a very, very aggressive outreach campaign to get in touch with legal scholars to ensure that whatever we put out once we get to the petitions is in fact viable under the structural and procedural requirement. Thank you for asking that. So the person you're referring to is the special master. And special masters exist in many successful redistricting systems. Sometimes they're required to be in state, sometimes they're required to be out of state. One thing that I should say is that the special master, based on the language as it stands, would, and I'd have to get back to you on the specific language, but I believe that the special master would in fact be taking one of the maps that was developed by these volunteer citizens on the commission. And so it's gaining outside support and outside expertise, but not undue outside influence. Yeah, please go ahead.
If I could add something to that answer, we worked in California to actually successfully pass an independent commission, and one of the things that we sorely needed and we were able to get was the outside independent people to be part of the process. One of the things that will happen when this process starts going is that every partisan and every special interest will jump to the table to try to get their influence on these commissions, and so it's vital to have somebody who's objective, and an out-of-state special master is something that can provide that as well.
The reason that it's exploratory is that we have a strong interest in this campaign being transparent, in the same way we want the redistricting process to be transparent. And so before we went out and said this is the final language, we wanted to go out to the people, to the voters, to the citizens, talk to as many as we could and say, we're exploring this. This is our draft language. We've been working hard as hell on it the last year or two, but we want to make sure that we get the response of the voters and hear what they have to say. So I think the question is, yes, Illinoisans are unhappy with the system as a whole, but some of them are happy with their legislators. And I think it depends on the legislator and it depends on the poll, but we don't necessarily know that that's the case. As I said, in 2/3 of House districts, we're in a situation where there is no challenger. And so we don't know whether the voters are happy with the legislators that they've got because they don't get a chance at the voting booth on election day to make that decision. And Ray, did you want to add some more?
I'd like to add, it isn't that the legislators that are elected to office necessarily all have to be replaced. It's that the legislators now that are voting in this building aren't as committed to their grassroots constituents because the way they get put on the ballot is not through those constituents' votes. It's through the leaders of the political parties and the way they draw the districts. And the whole guiding principle of this constitutional amendment is to take power that's concentrated in the few and put it back into the power of the voters. And that can happen, and that will happen, because I think you'll get better and fairer decisions when each legislative district is represented by people that feel an obligation to listen to the people in their districts. I think you'll have more competitive races. I think you'll have a better system and balanced system of state government. And I've worked in state government. Familiar with this.
He had just concluded by saying, I've worked in state government and I'm familiar with this. Peter was both an administrator of the DA and also director of the Department of Corrections and the Youth Commission under Governor Ogilvie. And any other questions?
Just a quick one.
Sure.
Ms. Hutchison had said, if I'm saying that right, that volunteers would draw them in, but really there'd be some paid people involved too, like the special master would get paid, right?
Yeah, so the question is volunteers will draw the map, but will there be paid people involved? Yeah, and I think the answer is of course. In any public interest work, there are experts who come in and aid the public officials and the civil servants and the volunteers to do their work better. That's exactly how it worked in California, which is very similar to this, as Ray knows well. And we looked at California and we saw that that process was quite well done, and they got great results from it.
Got a lot more competitive races too.
And as Peter was saying behind me, it did lead to a lot more competitive races in the state of California. Mark?
California, their electoral process in the U.S. Congress doesn't follow a primary and general the same way Illinois does. Does that dynamic change the calculus that you guys have to do with doing redistricting if you're going to use California as this prime example?
So Kent, did you want to come up and answer? So Kent Redfield is a professor emeritus at University of Illinois Springfield. He's also here representing the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform, where he's an advisor. Go ahead.
The fact whether you have a primary system or not really doesn't affect the drawing of the districts. Right now we draw districts in Illinois to take into account that there is a primary system and we're going to get a Democratic district or a Republican district and minimize competition. That's the way the system is designed, to minimize competition. And so this is about drawing the districts before you get to the electoral system. And it really, the fact that California has a different system in terms of going from primary to general really won't, isn't a factor in terms of what we're talking about here. There's no way of knowing that. We know for sure that the current system, the political gerrymander that we have, means that people are disengaged, that they don't identify with their districts, they don't identify with their representatives. It's harder to build grassroots and to do small fundraising if you don't have a natural community of interest. And so this will, I think, also change the dynamics of fundraising. So, how this, that's not a logical conclusion. It's rather, right now we have a concentration of power that draws money that then goes out into the races. The objective here is to change that dynamic so that you've got a much more open and competitive process.
Two questions, go ahead.
So the question is, what have you learned from your failures to get this on the ballot in the past? And how would you go about this differently? So the first thing that I would say is that this is the first initiative for Change Illinois. Many of the groups that have been involved in prior efforts at this are in our coalition. And actually Brad McMillan, who's on our board, representing the Institute for Principled Leadership at Bradley University, was quite involved in FairMap, and I think can answer some of those questions.
I think there's three big differences this time around. One, we're going to have a broader coalition that's better organized. Two, we're going to have 11 months to get the petition signatures versus the 5 months we had for FairMap. The last time we did this, we tried to work in good faith with the legislature on a legislative constitutional amendment. We're not doing that this time. We're going to go straight to the people, and I think we're going to be better financed to make this happen.
What effect will this have on, if I can, what effect will this have on the congressional races or do you desire? Because I know that's not part of it officially, correct? For the congressional map.
No, we can't, Bernie, we can't include the congressional map drawing in our constitutional amendment. I guess our hope is this, is if we get this on the ballot and it passes and the state legislators are a part of a transparent process, they're the ones that have the final say on the congressional maps. And so I think there'll be some pressure that will come to bear on the congressional map drawing process just naturally.
I just wanted to correct something too. Although some of us were involved in the California Independent Commission process. The Illinois process is not going to be an exact copy of the California process. We're very clear, and in fact, if anything, we can improve on California because there were some things that we learned over the years, on the last couple of years, that we should have thought about, and that we can learn from some of the mistakes that we made. We also have a good sense of how much money this is going to cost us, as well as how many people we need to be engaging across the state. So we actually are in a better, I think, situated than California was when they tried it.
So thank you, Ray and Brad. I just want to add a couple more things about FairMap and that process. So the first thing is that FairMap did a lot of spade work for us. It really was a great pilot test. At the time that FairMap started, the amount of people in the state of Illinois who favored this kind of constitutional amendment to reform redistricting was just above 50%. It's now above 70%. At the time that FairMap started, the number of people in the state who strongly favored something like this was 13%. It's now 38%. So we're not sure that FairMap was the reason for that, but we do know that the work that they did really brought a lot of public awareness on this issue and got a lot of people very fired up to take advantage of this and make major change. And in addition, as Ray said, we're looking at California, we're also looking at Arizona, we're also looking at New Jersey, we're also looking at Florida, we're also looking at the failure last year in Ohio of an effort to do this. And so there are a lot of lessons there to be learned in terms of making sure that you go out early enough with the language and getting a lot of feedback, in terms of making sure that you have the right legal representation, and making sure that you don't put too many resources toward the petitioning drive and not have resources left over for the campaign itself.
Should this make it to a ballot? Is there any strategy you guys are considering in doing this on a midterm election year where turnout is typically lower?
So I think, so first of all, I'll say this is the year. We are petitioning with a goal of November 2014. We are going to collect 300,000 signatures between now and early May, and it will be on the ballot in 2014. We do believe that despite the fact that turnout may be lower during a non-presidential year, it's likely, as many of you here know, that we'll have a pretty competitive gubernatorial race as well as a lot of other statewide races. And again, we need to win. In order to win, we need 50+1% of the vote, or 60+1% of the people who vote on the amendment. And looking at just the vote totals and the vote numbers that are out there, we do think it's very realistic to get the 1.5 to 2 million votes on November 14, 2014 that it's going to take in order to be successful and win. Please.
It's also the case that in a off-year election, this is going to get a lot more attention. We would hope it would be front and center in the governor's race about how should we be drawing districts, how should the people of Illinois be represented. These kinds of issues can get lost in a year where you've got a presidential campaign. And so this is a good time to get the citizens of Illinois to focus on how do they want the districts to be drawn in terms of people representing them.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.